Random House Audio presents In Need of a Good Wife by Kelly O'Connor McNees. Read for you by Kirsten Potter. Fall, 1866. Clara. The oak planks in the floor of Rathbone's basement tavern, Clara knew, were lined with invisible cracks. The men who drank at the tavern brought the filth of Manhattan City in on their boots, manure from the street and muck from the floor of the omnibus, and the men's careless steps ground the dirt into the floor. If Clara didn't whisk it out quickly enough with her broom, it would lodge in the cracks, and the planks would split down the middle. Mr. Rathbone would have to replace them, an expense that might make him think twice about how badly he needed a barmaid on his payroll. The thought straightened Clara's back, and she stretched it, the long fingers of her right hand clenched around the handle of her broom before resuming her chore. It worried Clara, the possibility of losing the job, and, in losing that, losing everything. The money she made only just paid for her room and board upstairs at Mrs. Ferguson's, with scarcely enough left over to keep body and soul together. Of course, if her father were still alive, things would be different. But he wasn't. He had died in debt back when the tavern was known by his name, as Wilson's, and Mr. Rathbone had bought it for a song. Clara supposed she should be glad for it. It wasn't easy making a go of it in these times. Rathbone had already lost what meager business they could muster to the new place across the street, the Eagle Tavern, which sold ale at half price for the first hour of the evening rush each night. The roughs lined up around the block, the very same roughs who had previously done their drinking at Rathbone's long walnut bar. Clara had no love for any of them. In fact, she detested drinking in a man, thought it made him weak and womanish. But what did fate hold for Rathbones without them? Here it was, the middle of the noon meal, and there wasn't a soul in the place. Each morning, as Clara polished that bar, its burled grain like marks left in the sand by the waves on Long Island Sound, she prayed that come evening Rathbones would be full of men, either too happy or too full of dread to go home. She didn't care which it was, as long as the men kept sliding coins toward the till. Of course, Clara indulged in using a little too much wax from time to time, buoyed by the thought that she could make the surface slick enough to yank the men's hands out from under their sorry jawbones, send their chins crashing down onto the hard wood. Clara's survival depended on the loyalty of fool drunks, and she did not take kindly to this fact. But the drunks didn't scare her either. She had stood up to plenty of them in her time, once separating a pair of scuffling men by clobbering the bigger one in the back of the head with her rolling pin. At 1:30, 2 men dressed in black came in and took a small table by the window. One was lanky and tight-lipped, and the other was fat, with a wide face like a camel's. His smile seemed to stretch all the way from one ear to the other. He rubbed his hands together as if to warm them, but it was, Clara had noticed when she descended the stairs from her room at Mrs. Ferguson's that morning, a perfectly pleasant October day. "Miss?" said the heavy man, waving Clara over with his hand. She took her time leaning the broom up against the wall and making her way across the room to them. As she walked, she recognized something in her own slow amble, and realized it was a memory of her mother who had walked this way, 7 bulky children underfoot, and a husband with a temper like a festering sore. Mrs. Wilson lived long enough to see 3 of her children make it to adulthood, Clara and 2 sisters. Mora had run off with a prospector 6 years back and hadn't been heard from since. Frances was hit by a streetcar the following year. Once there had been 9 Wilsons, but now there was just Clara. "If there is any justice in this world our Creator made, Reverend Potter, they will be serving a chicken pie," the fat man said. "I've heard it's the best in the city." Well, there you have it, Clara thought. I pray for customers, and the Lord sends me a couple of holy rollers. I'll be lucky if they order coffee. Truth be told, Clara was a bit flattered to hear them talking up her pie. She had been the one to suggest to Mr. Rathbone that the tavern should serve a proper meal at midday. Their competitors served only hard-boiled eggs and pickled herring on crackers, a pauper's meal. Reverend Potter, his fine hair precisely combed and oiled, glanced skeptically at the small, grease-clouded window that looked up to William Street. Pigeons shuddered by, and the broad hems of pedestrian skirts passed like great grey ships on the sea. "I'm not convinced anything good can come," he said, "from a kitchen with a rat's-eye view of the world." Clara cleared her throat to ensure that this Reverend Potter knew she had overheard his remark. "Afternoon, gentlemen. What may I bring you?" "Good afternoon," the heavy man said. His gaze lingered on her face a moment. "What handsome eyes you have, miss." Clara pressed her lips into a line and raised an eyebrow. She knew very well that she had plain eyes, deep-set, with stubby lashes. She was tall for a woman and slender, with a neck that could be, on its best days, swan-like, provided she was in a well-shadowed room. Clara prided herself on that neck, her uncomplaining disposition, the pie. These were her good features, not her eyes. The fat minister's spirits were not dampened by her poor reception of his compliment. "And what are you serving for dinner today?" "You're late for dinner, but as luck, or the Lord, allows, we have a few chicken pies left," Clara lied. Behind the door to the kitchen, a dozen pies sat lukewarm in their tins, still lined up where she had left them when they came out of the oven at 11. The food would be long lost to the mice by now if it weren't for the tavern cat, on patrol around the perimeter of the stove. He was an ornery Tom, orange and slinking and just about full up of scathe for this plagued world. "Thank you. We'll have those." Clara turned to go. "And an ale for me, Reverend?" He looked at his companion. "Milk," Reverend Potter said. "Cold." Clara nodded. In the kitchen she asked Bessie, the only person in this world taking orders from Clara, to warm the pies, and the girl slid them into the range on her flat wooden paddle. Behind the bar, Clara drew the ale slowly, careful to keep the foam from rising over the rim of the glass. The right reverend ought to have his ale drawn properly, even if his friend took his God-fearing a little too seriously. Clara sighed when she heard the words echo in her mind. The right reverend. That was just the sort of thing George was fond of saying, in his signature tone of false deference. Without fail, his cheek earned him a laugh from his friends, the feather in his cap. And as for Clara, well, she feigned exasperation, but to be the girl George had set his sights on, to be on his arm walking up Broadway past a bevy of laundresses standing in an alley, their cheeks pink from the steam even in January, their ravaged arms red up to the elbows, was a marvel. Those girls were sucking on so much jealousy and longing Clara liked to think it made their teeth ache. Clara was George's girl. She would have settled for being George's hat. And when he used his poker winnings to buy her a ruby ring and took her down to the Trinity Church to rattle off those vows, he never once broke into a smile, not even when the minister uttered the word chastity in the presence of her swelling belly. Clara thought of what they had done in the gallery of the Bowery Theater, behind the peach velvet drapery with gold braid fringe that skimmed the floor in time with their exertions. Clara had imagined the drapery was the most exquisite bed curtain in the finest mansion in town. That 3 nearby couples heaved in their own syncopated rhythm mattered not a whit to Clara. They were flies buzzing against a window pane. She had believed, for once in her miserable life, that with George the profit outweighed the loss. But if George could float you on the air in the palm of his hand, he could tie you to an anchor and turn his back while you plummeted to the depths. New girls came through Mrs. Ferguson's parlor in flocks, looking fresh and pink, without a care in the world for such a thing as hanging on to a husband. The word was still new on Clara's tongue, tart like a berry. It wasn't long before George took up with this one and that one, parading them around just to hurt Clara, it seemed, for there was no one else to notice. She knew all about the roving and insatiable longings of men, and would have been willing to tolerate a great deal, If only George had allowed her to retain at least some dignity. He had his reason.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?